It's 1998, and inside an office in Emeryville, California, a technical director named Larry Cutler is staring at his screen, watching a folder disappear in real time. 40 files, then 4, then none. He isn't imagining it. Somewhere on Pixar's network, a command has just been typed that will erase most of a movie nobody outside the building even knows exists yet. That movie is Toy Story 2, and for the next several hours, it will hang by a thread nobody at Pixar even knew existed. This isn't a rumor passed around animation forums, or one of those stories that gets more dramatic every time it's retold. It's a documented, verified event, confirmed by the people who lived through it, later detailed in Pixar co-founder Ed Catmull's own account of the studio's history. And what actually happened over the next 24 hours is stranger and far more human than anything a screenwriter would dare invent. Here's the question worth holding on to as this unfolds. How do you accidentally delete a Hollywood movie? Not damage it, not lose a few scenes, nearly all of it. And who exactly ends up being the person who saves it? To understand how close Pixar came to losing one of its most beloved films, you have to understand what Pixar actually was in 1998. This wasn't yet the studio behind a decade of billion-dollar franchises. It was still proving itself. Toy Story, released in 1995, had been a gamble that paid off in a way nobody in the industry had fully predicted. Toy Story 2 was supposed to be the follow-through, and originally, it wasn't even meant to be a real theatrical film. It started life as a much smaller, direct-to-video release, the kind of low-stakes sequel studios churned out to cash in on a hit without risking much. Then, Disney executives saw the work in progress, and they liked it enough to upgrade it mid-production into a full theatrical release. That single decision quietly set a trap. A direct-to-video schedule doesn't leave room for theatrical quality polish. Suddenly, artists and technical directors were racing against a release date that had never moved, rebuilding sequences, refining animation, trying to turn a modest sequel into something worthy of a movie theater screen, all without getting any extra time to do it. And every piece of that rushed. High-pressure work, every character model, every rigged movement, every environment, every line of code that made Woody's hat sit just right lived in one place. A central file system, a network of servers humming away in a back room, holding what was, at that point, months of irreplaceable labor from an entire studio. Then, someone typed a command. The exact keystrokes have become something of studio legend, but the effect is not in dispute. A deletion command was run at the root level of the file system, the digital equivalent of telling a computer to erase everything inside a folder, and every folder inside that folder, with no confirmation screen, no warning, no undo button waiting to save you. It's the kind of command engineers are trained to fear, specifically because of what it does the moment something goes wrong. And something went very wrong. Cutler wasn't the only one who noticed. Orrin Jacob, an associate technical director on the film, was working nearby and got pulled into what quickly became a scramble to stop the bleeding. Someone yanked the power, trying to physically halt the process before it spread any further. It didn't matter. The damage had already cascaded too far, too fast. Character folders that should have held dozens of files were nearly empty. Entire animated sequences representing weeks of artists' work were simply gone, as if they had never existed. By the time the dust settled, roughly 90% of the film's files had been deleted, not backed up somewhere safe and waiting patiently to be restored. Gone, erased, a movie, disappearing in real time, one folder at a time, which is where most disaster stories would already be over. Losing that much work should have been recoverable with a single phone call to it and a routine restore from the previous night's backup. That's the entire point of a backup. It's the safety net nobody thinks about until the moment they desperately need it. Except when the team went looking for Pixar's backups, they found something worse than empty folders. They found backups that hadn't actually been working. For roughly a month, the automated system that was supposed to be quietly archiving the studio's work every single night had been silently failing, not crashing loudly, not throwing up some obvious red alert. Just quietly, invisibly not doing its job while everyone upstream assumed it was. Nobody had been checking. Why would they? A working backup system is designed to be invisible. You only think about it the moment you need it most. and by then, it's already too late to fix. So now Pixar wasn't looking at a temporary inconvenience. They were staring down the very real possibility that Toy Story 2, the film Disney was expecting, the film theaters were already scheduling release dates around, had just lost most of its physical existence, with absolutely no safety net underneath it. Executives were pulled into a room. According to accounts from people who were there, the mood wasn't loud panic exactly. It was something quieter and heavier, the kind of silence that settles over a group of smart, capable, experienced people when they realize there might genuinely be nothing left to do. And then somebody remembered Galyn Susman. At that exact moment, Susman wasn't even in the building. She was the film's supervising technical director, meaning she sat at the center of the production's entire technical backbone, but she was home, on maternity leave, having recently given birth to her son. In 1998, remote work wasn't the norm it is today. It was, if anything, viewed with a bit of suspicion. But Susman had made an arrangement to keep contributing from home while caring for her newborn, and as part of that arrangement, she'd been copying portions of the film onto her own personal computer so she could keep working outside the office walls. It was never meant to be a backup. It wasn't part of any disaster recovery plan, because nobody had built one that accounted for this. It was simply a workaround for a new mother trying to stay connected to a project she cared deeply about, while also raising a child. And in that moment, sitting quietly in her house, it was the only complete copy of Toy Story 2 that still existed anywhere on Earth. Jacob made the call, and what followed sounds almost too careful, too tender, to belong in a corporate data recovery story. Susman's computer, an ordinary home machine, holding what might be the last surviving copy of a major theatrical film, was wrapped in blankets, buckled into the back seat of her car like a passenger, driven back to the Pixar studio with the kind of caution usually reserved for something alive, something breakable, something that could not be replaced. Once it arrived, the real work began, and it wasn't instant, and it wasn't clean. The files on Susman's machine were roughly 2 weeks old, which meant some progress made since her last home copy was still, quietly, unrecoverable. The team had to methodically compare her version against fragments pulled from old tape archives, cross-checking tens of thousands of individual assets one by one, trying to determine which version of which file was the most complete, the most current, the least damaged. It was slow. It was exhausting. It demanded an almost unbearable level of attention to detail, carried out over what became a marathon stretch of verification that stretched on for days. In the end, the vast majority of the film was recovered. Estimates from people directly involved suggest somewhere around 90% of what had been lost was successfully restored, largely because of Susman's home copy. A small percentage of the work, roughly the remaining 10%, was gone for good, forcing the team to redo pieces of it entirely from scratch, under a deadline that had never once slowed down to accommodate any of this. Here's the twist that makes this story more than just a lucky save, though. Around this exact same period, Toy Story 2's story itself was undergoing a completely separate crisis. Pixar's leadership, including director John Lasseter, had grown unsatisfied with the direction the narrative was heading, and made the difficult call to substantially rework the film's story in the months leading up to release an enormous undertaking on its own, running in parallel with the technical near disaster happening in the servers. It's worth being honest about that overlap, because it's tempting to blur these two crises into one single dramatic beat. They were related in timing, but distinct in cause. The Deletion was an infrastructure failure. The story rework was a creative decision. Both simply happened to be converging on the exact same impossible deadline at the exact same time. Somehow, between a near-total data loss and a last-minute creative overhaul, Pixar delivered Toy Story 2 on schedule in November 1999. It went on to become both a critical and commercial success, eventually recognized as one of the rare sequels considered to have surpassed its original. None of the people involved in causing the deletion were ever publicly named, or, as far as has been reported, faced serious professional consequences. Understandably so. This wasn't malice. It wasn't even obvious carelessness. It was one command, typed by someone who had almost certainly typed similar commands hundreds of times before without a single problem. That's the part of this story that lingers, if you actually sit with it. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't sabotage. It was a routine action on an ordinary day that happened to intersect with a backup system nobody knew was already silently broken. Pixar took the lesson seriously. In the years that followed, the studio rebuilt its entire approach to data protection, from the ground up redundant backup systems, regular testing protocols, and a level of institutional caution that this one incident had painfully, expensively taught them they needed. It's the kind of lesson every organization insists it's already learned, right up until the backup light quietly stops blinking and nobody notices, because nobody's watching. What makes this story worth remembering isn't just that a movie almost vanished into nothing, it's what actually saved it. Not a corporate contingency plan, not a redundant off-site server farm humming away in some windowless building. A new mother, working quietly from her living room, making copies so she could stay close to a job she loved, while raising her child an arrangement that at the time probably looked like nothing more than an inconvenient exception to normal office policy. Somewhere in every system we trust today, every cloud backup, every autosave, every quiet assurance that it's all handled automatically, there's a version of that month at Pixar, waiting patiently to happen again. The infrastructure fails silently. Nobody checks until it's already too late. And when disaster finally does strike, what saves the day is rarely the system that was actually designed to. It's the unexpected one, the copy nobody asked for, made by someone who wasn't even supposed to be working that day, and who never once thought of herself as a hero. That's the part of this story worth sitting with, long after the screen goes dark. Not that Toy Story 2 was almost lost, but that it was saved by exactly the kind of small, human, off-the-books decision that no policy manual would have ever thought to require.